Greetings, friends around the world. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy Channel. Trade, tariffs, trade deals, trade wars. These things have been in the news. Are these developments consistent with predictions and warnings that the Church of God has been making for years, even decades? If you've been paying attention to the news, you'll see a lot of trade issues being discussed. You see that some trade issues are being discussed with the United Kingdom, who voted to leave the European Union on the 23rd of June of 2016. You'll find out there are issues with people who were, or nations that were part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. This was an agreement of nations that were in the Pacific region, well, not China, to have some kind of a trade deal there. One of the first acts of U.S. President Donald Trump was to withdraw the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. This has created a vacuum that nations such as China and Germany want to take advantage of. Are trade issues going to lead to anything of importance? Well, I think so. Trade is sufficiently important. The British Prime Minister Theresa May visited U.S. President Donald Trump on the 27th of January 2017 to discuss trade and the future of Britain as far as world trade is in addition to that. Now, I'd like to read something from a secular news source. The title here is "Only One Step Away from Global Trade War." They give various things about this, talked about the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Then, talking about U.S. President Donald Trump, says, Trump's protectionist mantras are already being echoed around the world. America's trading partners are considering retaliatory measures. The flames of global trade war are starting to flare up. Isolated trade war hotspots are starting to smolder in different parts of the world. So what are people going to do about this? Well, there was an interview in the German daily Süddeutsche Zeitung, and I apologize for my bad German here, with German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier. And he said, until a few days ago, I couldn't have imagined that a French president and a Chinese president would have to instruct their new American colleague about the advantages of an open world and free trade, said Steinmeier. We have people looking at what's going on in the United States and saying things are happening with trade. Here's another article, January 27, 2017. Japan is preparing for all possible contingencies regarding trade talks with the United States, including, according to other sources, a trade war. Something else in the same date. The chaos surrounding U.S. and Mexico relations continued Friday, pushing the countries closer to a trade war that threatens to spoil decades of friendship and economic cooperation. There's another one. This is related to German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Hollande. It says there are challenges from the new U.S. administration, challenges regarding rules of commerce, regarding the way we think conflicts around the world should be solved. Of course, we need to speak to Donald Trump because he was elected by the U.S. to be their president. But we should speak to him from the European point of view, promoting our interests and values. So we see some chaos going on with various nations. And I'd like to read a warning from the late Pastor General of the Old Worldwide Church of God, Herbert W. Armstrong. It was published in March of 1971 in the Old Plain Truth magazine. He said, or wrote, "Trade war looming to trigger World War III? Either we start raising high tariff barriers against other countries, starting a trade war, which would in time trigger a nuclear war that will destroy us, or American workers are going to have to meet the competition of workers in other countries by lowering living standards. Obviously, American workers aren't going to choose to do the latter. And if we don't, the handwriting is on our national wall." He wrote this decades ago, and in a sense, I'm sure he thought it was going to happen much sooner than it was. Now, why would he think that trade wars could lead to world wars? Well, because back in 1930, there was something called the Smoot-Hawley Bill that became law. with the highest tariffs in the U.S.'s history. Many believe that triggered the Great Depression and ultimately led to World War II. Now, I'd like to read something else from the Plain Truth magazine. This time is from Gene Hogberg. This was published in May of 1971. Now, I met Gene Hogberg a couple of times, but I didn't know him particularly well. But here's what he wrote. Envision the startling future of Western Europe. A new Western Europe controlling perhaps half of the world, all world trade by exclusive agreements with dozens of nations who produce raw materials. A United States of Europe possessing a single currency, a currency so strong it will replace the US dollar as the kingpin of world trade. A United Europe developing great military strength. Such a European powerhouse is just over the horizon. The biggest obstacle to accomplishing this effort remains its nagging political question. Well, I want to comment there before I go further. Since this was written, the Europeans did get their own currency. Now, it could still be changed, but they do have one now called the euro. In terms of political obstacles, many in Europe are pointing to the election of U.S. President Donald Trump and the vote by the United Kingdom to leave the European Union as reasons why it is time for Europe to get together and go past the political obstacles that are in their way. Here's something else Gene Hogberg wrote back in 1981. The handwriting is on the wall. It should be obvious that an expanding Europe will not be forever tolerant, will not forever tolerate monetary irresponsibility on the part of the United States. Well, since this was written, the United States has become more irresponsible. I read that there's now over $20 trillion of U.S. debt. It says they are developing this only a matter of time before the Europeans cut loose from the dollar. They've already put machinery in motion. And machinery was put in motion a long time ago, but it isn't finished yet. Now, I'd like to read something that I wrote. Something that I wrote back on the 3rd of March, 2008. And you can go to the COGwriter.com website if you want to see this. And here's what I wrote. So negotiations will continue and some type of loose agreements will happen. I'm talking about trade agreements. In the spirit of accommodation and personal interest, many of the standards of the European Union will be adopted by the USA, Canada, and Mexico, as well as nearly all the countries in the world. However, over time, it's going to be increasingly clear that British will be more in alignment with the Canadians and Americans than the European Union, and the European Union will have more in common with the Mexicans. Trade wars and/or serious trade disputes will most likely arise. We are starting to see that now. I wrote that almost 9 years ago. We are starting to see this. Then I wrote, the Brits will ultimately decide that they're more supportive of the Americans and Canadians. They will be so much more supportive that they will end up in a trading agreement with them, with the Australians and New Zealanders probably also becoming part of that agreement. The European Union will decide that Mexico and the rest of Latin America are more in agreement with it, and thus make some serious trading agreement with most or all of Latin America. The Vatican influence will also have effect here since Latin America is highly Roman Catholic. I also wrote then, the Europeans and Americans, however, will continue to have military agreements, though many will be tense about them. We've certainly been seeing that, especially in the last several months. How trade wars increase costs and international tensions. Now in 2016 I wrote, tariffs can lead to trade wars, and trade wars can lead to real wars. The Bible teaches that Europe one day, relatively soon, will dominate international trade. I'd like to also read something that I posted at the COGwriter.com website the day before Donald Trump took office. This is from January 19th, 2017. Trade wars have casualties and tariffs increase prices and can cause inflation. Various nations will not like the policies that Donald Trump has advocated. Trade wars have been listed as part of the 12 Gray Swan events to watch for 2017. Now, we have a video for that, the Bible News Prophecy channel you can watch. Trade disputes are likely to be a factor to lead to World War III. There's a cost to trade wars and tariffs. Those who think otherwise are fooling themselves. And we're seeing the world move closer and closer to the time of the trade war. Now, what is going on? I'd like to read something that Reuters published, January 27, 2017. quote, Berlin should be ready to seize new opportunities in Asia as Washington steps away from global trade deals. Germany's new foreign minister said on Friday, and Chancellor Angela Merkel said Germany and the European Union should seek new trade deals. We're banking on a fair, free trade around the world, Merkel said. With growing concern over U.S. President Trump's protectionist stance on trade, Merkel said to be clear that every country would take a tough stance in negotiations, but all interests must be taken into account. So we see a situation now where the Europeans and the Chinese are saying, hey, if the United States goes more protectionist, we won't. We are going to try to make deals. We want to raise up. Something that I saw today in the news was Europeans said that they want a stronger Europe and that they want to no longer be subservient. They mean subservient to the United States. They want to set the world standards and they want to become a major trading player. Is this going to happen? Yes, there's a reason why myself and others in the Church of God have been saying this for years or decades. Let's go to the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 18. And I'd like to cut down verse 3. We're talking about Babylon here. And before we get to well, let me read this. It says, For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. Now, who is this talking about? Well, this is talking about a European power. How do we know it's a European power? Let's go over to the prior chapter, Revelation chapter 17, and verse 1. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying, Come, I'll show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth commit fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk by the wine of her fornication. So we're hearing somebody that sounds a lot like the one we were talking about in Revelation 18. It's the same party, or really the same party. In verse 5, and on her forehead was a name that was written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. But the woman said to me, Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast you saw, which was not and is not, will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast who was and is not. Here's the mind of wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains which this woman sits. 7 heads are 7 mountains. Well, the city of 7 hills, the 7 mountains, is Rome. Now, this is not just a Church of God position. You can read this from Protestant writers and Roman Catholic writers, for that matter. They understand that. And go down to verse 18. Woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. We're talking about a European power. It's going to prosper. It's going to make people wealthy for a while. But that's not going to last. Yes, Europe is going to rise up. Yes, there will be trade disputes between the United States and Europe. For years, I should have read this one too, but for years I've warned that trade disputes between the United States and Europe may be a factor that will trigger the Europeans to attack the United States. I believe it certainly will be one of the factors. In verse 11, the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. They're not going to buy their merchandise anymore because the European power will be gone. Verse 12, the merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, marble, and cinnamon, and incense, fragrant oil, and frankincense, wine and flour, fine flour, and wheat and cattle and sheep, horses, chariots, bodies and the souls of men. So yes, we're going to sadly see slavery again. But that's a pretty extensive list. It's a trading list. So what's going on now? We're hearing talks of tariffs and trade wars. We're hearing the voice of Europeans saying, we're not going to be subservient to the United States. We want free trade deals. We are going to take advantage of the fact the United States is pulling out of various parts of the world and talking about tariffs. Now, it doesn't mean Europeans will not have any tariffs themselves. But what it does mean is Europe is taking steps to become the Babylonian world trader that the Bible warns is going to rise up. We in the Church of God have been warning about this for years. And as I said, nearly 9 years ago, I said to look for problems between the United States and Mexico. And look at how Europe is going to play into this. That's the United States, Great Britain, and others are going to get together. We're seeing these things come to pass. What this book teaches is going to come to pass. That's why we can say this confidently. World events are aligning with Bible prophecy. You can trust the Bible. The Bible is true. The Bible talks about these events. We in the Church of God have talked about these events, and they will come to pass. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy Channel.